In 1620, a band of determined English Puritans boarded the tiny ship Mayflower and set sail for Virginia. And here is the classic question for even a college history course. What was the name of the ship and what year did these pilgrims come to America? 1620, Mayflower. And that will do you absolutely no good on my test. None at all. Does it matter that it was 1619? Okay. 1621? The ship was named Argonaut. Who cares? Now, we need to know Mayflower 1620 in order to put things together, but I'm not going to put that on the test. I want to know why. Why did they come? That's what matters. Why did they come? So that's the first thing you have to learn about this class. It's kind of strange. I want to know why. Not the petty details, right? There is never going to be a specifically date question on any exam or quiz. That makes the class easier and harder. Oh, you will pray for the day when all you had to know was a date. Okay? Does that sound strange? Okay. And you know, everybody always says, oh, I hated history, I hated all those dates. Yeah. Well, the captain of the Mayflower, not a pilgrim, he's a ship's captain. He wanted to turn back as the ship came across the Atlantic because the storms that fall were so horrible, the ship was actually breaking apart. But the pilgrims managed to fix the ship so that the voyage could go on. And then another storm arose and blew the ship off course. You see, they had intended to go to the English colony in Jamestown, founded 1607, where people already were. But they later came to believe, these pilgrims, that God had other plans, that God had directed the storms, and they had been blown dramatically north, and they eventually landed on the rocky shores of New England, present-day Massachusetts, the wilderness. One of their leaders, William Bradford. And Bradford is in the note guide, isn't he? Right? And if a person's name is in the note guide, that's an important person. If I mention a person in the lecture and their name is not in the note guide, not so important. By the way, if you're reading in the text, doesn't matter what text it is, or a book, if a person's name comes up time and time again, what do you deduce? Person's name is mentioned once and you never see it again, what do you deduce? Not that important. There you go. Key to all your college classes. Repetition, important. Singular statement, not so much. Here's another little clue for learning. If you're not sure if that person's going to come up again and again, go to the index. Look at how many page numbers are there next to their name in the index. You see 1, you know you're done. You see 15, you know you got an important person. Okay? Did you know learning was that easy? Analysis is what we're teaching here at the college level. Not memory so much, analysis. You can do that in every class you have. Except math, of course. Who knows what the mathematicians are doing? I never could figure that stuff out. Well, Bradford remembered their joy at stepping foot on dry land. After the voyage they've had? No kidding. He wrote in his journal, being thus arrived at safe harbor, we fell upon our knees and blessed the God of heaven who had brought us over the vast and furious ocean. Yeah, the ocean had almost broken the ship and the ocean had blown them way off course. Ah, the great why. Why had these pilgrims come to America? They were unhappy Christians back in England. In case you don't know it, England is the mother country of those of white people who settled this country in the early days. All right, the mother country. And these pilgrims deeply disagreed with the Church of England. And the Church of England was the only legal form of Christianity in England in the 17th century. And these pilgrims, the Puritans, had been persecuted for their faith. During the Protestant Reformation in the 1530s, a century before, the Church of England, which is known as the Anglican Church, so you need to learn that if you don't know. Church of England, Anglican Church. During the Protestant Reformation, the Church of England had simply replaced the Pope, the Catholic Pope, with the King of England. The King of England is the head of the Church of England instead of the Pope. And the Anglican Church still placed great emphasis on the sacraments. Sacraments are, in the Christian faith, are baptism and communion and so forth. And in Catholicism, you had to have these sacraments to be saved. And the Anglican Church had watered that down a little bit, but those ideas were still there. And so Puritans saw the Church of England, Anglicanism, as just a watered-down version of Catholicism and still in error. Because what do Puritans think you need to do to be saved? Ephesians 2, 9 and 10. Okay? So the Puritans, they wanted to purify, hence the name, it's easy once you understand the issues. They wanted to purify the Church of England by getting rid of its leftover Catholic practices and beliefs. Puritans disagreed with both Anglicans and especially Catholics. So what do the Puritans believe? Here's where ideas matter. This is why we said early in the class, ideas are what we want you to learn here. Okay? Ideas like freedom and equality. Now, in this case, in terms of Christian theology. This is a Christian school. Those of you who are freshmen, have any freshmen in the class? I have a bunch of freshmen in the class. You're taking Theo 101, most of you, right? Christian theology. Brand new class this year. Why are we doing that? Because we just love to torture you. Well, there is that, but no, the real reason we're teaching you Christian theology because in the culture you live in, it is not part of that culture. We wouldn't have bothered 50 years ago. It was part of the culture. Even non-Christians knew it. Not anymore. And sadly, even many of our churches are afraid to spend a sermon on theology because everybody says it's so what? Boring. But if you don't have a basic understanding of theology, how do you know what you believe? When the storms arise in your life and your theology is bad, your ship will be wrecked. Well, so here's what the Puritans believe. Number one, men can approach God on their own. They don't need a pope. They don't need a priest. If you're a Catholic, you cannot be saved without those. No pope or king was required as an intermediary for salvation. Who, as a Puritan, is your intermediary for salvation? Jesus Christ, God's Son. Communion. Communion was important to the Puritans as a way of remembering Christ's sacrifice on the cross, my body, my blood. But the wine and the bread that you eat do not literally become the body and blood of Christ. Catholics believe it does. Some Protestants even still believe it does. So no, for Puritans, that's not true. 3, finally, Puritans believed that the king was not supreme in the church, or, and this is the real kicker, even in the government. That is what? Heresy, Because the king said he was the head of the church, the Anglican church, and if clearly the king is the head of the government, so what's that? Treason. Well, you can see why good old King James is not real fond of the Puritans. He's deeply antagonistic to them. You can see why he persecuted them. They are challenging him on both of the important levels. They challenge his control of both the church and the state. And then Puritans also believed that God had made two covenants. Covenant is just a fancy way of saying a contract. Puritans believed God had made two contracts with men. One was Ephesians 2:8 and 9. Man was saved by faith in Jesus Christ, by God's grace. End of story. No king, no pope, no priest required. You can get down on your knees and say, God, forgive me. I believe in your Son, Jesus Christ. No pope, no king, no priest. And two, in the second contract or covenant, government was a contract between men, and the men involved had the right to adjust the contract whenever necessary. What does that sound like? What do we do in Congress or our state legislatures whenever we see a need arise? It's a fancy way of saying we change the law, we adjust the contract. The law was this and now it's that. You've just adjusted the contract. Puritans are saying in an era when king's word was absolute, oh no, we can adjust the contract if we want to. And the king says, get out of England. If you can. Times are very different 400 years ago, folks. Question is, why? How have we gotten where we are, where we take this adjusting of contract for granted? That's why history matters. Not the date, 1620. The why. And so, in response to these Puritan beliefs, King James said, and I quote, I shall harry them. It's an old way of saying I shall chase them out of the land. Harry, harass, right? So it's important to remember that Puritans wanted to reform both the church and the government of England. Now the Pilgrims, I kept using those two words, Puritan Pilgrims, as if they were interchangeable, and they are to a point. Because the Pilgrims are a small branch of Puritans. Not all Puritans are Pilgrims. In fact, the majority are not. But all Pilgrims are Puritans. Okay, just a small group. So now we're concerned with the Pilgrims. Well, the Pilgrims thought that reforming England was a lost cause. The Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England and change the government. They were not giving up on England, okay? But the Pilgrims said, it's a waste of time. We're out of here, okay? That's the difference between Pilgrims and Puritans. The Pilgrims wanted to set up their own community under their view of how men should live in some place that would provide them with the freedom to do that. We want to set up our own small community where we're free. So what do they want? Freedom. Sound familiar? Yeah. The Pilgrims gave up not only on England, but on all people who did not live godly lives the way they saw the word godly. Okay? They want to set up a community that is just people like them. So they could all live the same way without any controversy. And to the Pilgrims, the church, broadly speaking, did not include everybody who lives in a community. The church only includes people who believe in Jesus Christ. Okay? That's a New Testament definition of the church right there. But back in England, as far as the Anglicans were concerned and the Catholics in Europe and so forth, the church was everybody who lived in the village that went to the church, right? Or even those that lived in the village but didn't go to the church. They were still part of that diocese, okay? That group. Puritans and Pilgrims especially are saying, no way. If you don't believe, you're not part of the church. Well, clearly they could not do this in England. So in 1607, a group of them decided that the best place they could go to was Holland. It's a little Holland sojourn. Now, Holland had a reputation for granting religious freedom, so that's why they went there. And they were there for over a decade, a small group of pilgrims. But after 8 or 10 years had passed, they were horrified to find that their children were doing what? Speaking Dutch, acting Dutch. You know what kids do? They mimic the culture around them. See? And the Pilgrims are Englishmen, and they're horrified of the fact their kids are becoming Dutch. This isn't working. We got to find someplace else where we can not only be pilgrims and Christians, but also Englishmen. So they're going to leave Holland. They resolved to find a new place where their faith, their beliefs about government and community could grow in, there's that word again, freedom. So in the fall of 1620, after getting themselves organized, they set out for Virginia in the hope of building that Christian community on the shores of the New World. Remember, they were headed for Virginia to start with, but they ain't going to get there, because we already know the storms come up. But God, they believe, through torrential storms, had directed the tiny Mayflower dramatically north to New England. And so the Pilgrims would either flourish or flounder on the rocky shores of New England. Before they even set foot on solid ground, trouble arose amongst the Pilgrims. Ha! They all wanted to be on the same page, think the same things, but they didn't have enough money to go to the New World on their own, and so they had to go to an English company, an investment company, to borrow the money. And when they did that, the company said, here are some strings attached. You need to take some people with you that will help you establish a new colony. Pilgrims had no choice but to accept then a bunch of people on board the Mayflower who were not pilgrims. That's kind of contrary to the whole point, wasn't it? Now, most of these people are of what faith? What version of Christianity? There you go. Don't think of them as non-Christian. Oh, some of them probably were. But they're Anglicans. And some Anglicans were of deep Christian faith, just different. Well, these people now, as the ship approaches the shores of New England, said, hey, we are not going to live underneath you pilgrims, and with your laws and your ideas, we're going to go our own way. What's that sound like? It sounds like Americans today, right? Get the heck out of my way. Don't tell me what to do. Well, there you go. Disagreement is endemic in the human condition. Now, the Pilgrims, they decided, hey, we got to get together here. There's only 102 of us. And we don't know what we're going to experience here in this wilderness. We got to be on the same page, folks, just to survive. And this was true. The Pilgrims and these people that the Pilgrims now call the strangers, that tells you everything you need to know, right? Strangers. They're facing starvation because all they have with them is this stores, that is the food on the ship, and whatever the seas and the forests can provide. In the winter of 1620-21. They're going to drop anchor in December, folks. Not good timing. Well, eventually, they talked this through, and the more sober-minded of the strangers realized that they had to make common cause with the Pilgrims. In addition, there were reports amongst them of what the Native Americans could be expected to do. And this terrified these Pilgrims and strangers, caused them to work together instead of apart. Reports written down in the years before said, the Indians delight to torment men in the most bloody manner that may be, skinning some alive with the shells of fishes, cutting off members and joints of others by members, that means arms and legs, by piecemeal, and broiling them on the coals. Well, this was true, but previous voyages to the New World had captured Native Americans and sent them off back to Europe against their will. The whole story. So no wonder there was antagonism and fear. Keep that in mind as we find out what happens between the Pilgrims and some, not all, but some of the Indians in the near future here. Both sides have reason to not only be afraid, but maybe even to hate. History is complicated. No, they all needed each other, so it was agreed that all should live under one authority. We got to stick together. We got to have a fortress. We got to protect ourselves. And to that end, they created and signed the Mayflower Compact. Mayflower Compact is the first form of government in New England. I just made a mistake. Hopefully that's the last of this semester. Thank you for laughing. The first English form of government. Okay? Indians have government. Come on. Mayflower Compact. It's called the Compact. Got to give the Pilgrims their word, but we might call it a constitution or articles, confederation, basic laws. What does it say? Having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, we know how that went, do these present solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one another, covenant, contract, and combine ourselves into a civil body politic. Civil means non-religious. Civil government is not religious government. The church has its government, and then our states, our counties and such have their government. That's civil. These guys are creating a civil government that is non-church. A civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and the furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws. Yes, the word equal is in there. So all these people are going to be governed by equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time, as shall be thought most meet, that is necessary and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission. Of course, everybody has to memorize the Mayflower Compact. You're not laughing. You should be. I'm not going to have you memorize the Mayflower Compact. Why? What is it? What's unique about it? Everybody's going to be governed by the same laws. Is that the way it was in England? No. Europe? Still less. This is new. This is something different, yes.
I'm sorry, I might have missed this. Does this affect the Native Americans?
No. This is the people on board the Mayflower. Different enough, though, okay? You see, the Native Americans are going to be a foreign country. You don't pass laws for a foreign country, right? But you can have a treaty with a foreign country, right? Well, we'll see how that goes. Native Americans are not going to live in Plymouth. In fact, they're going to live miles and miles away. So they're not underneath this. Good question, by the way, but they're not underneath these laws, yes.
They made in the compact,
That is an excellent question. Why did they make a civil government instead of a state church government? Okay? In England, it's the state and the church are all together underneath the what? The king. It's not a civil government. It's not separated church and state. See? In all the other European nations, the Catholic Church pretty much, in some places Protestant church, but not separated. But in America, because that's the way it was in Holland, you see, the Pilgrims learned from the Dutch. And they thought that was a pretty good idea. So they separated it. So this is obviously the first example of the separation of church. And you've all heard of the separation of church and state, right? That is part of our culture still. There are many Americans who would like to eradicate the church, separate the church and state. Even to the point that if you're a Christian, you can't be a member of Congress. Yeah, it's true. It's not the common thought at this point, but there are those who think that. Well, according to Harvard historian Samuel Eliot Morison, writing about this period, he's one of the great authorities on the Puritans. He said about this period now, and this is why history matters, this is why we should study the past. He said, the Mayflower Compact of 1620 stands with the Virginia Assembly of 1619, just the year before, as the two foundation stones of American institutions. If you don't know this, you don't know where we came from. Nothing like them happened anywhere else for 200 years. We're 200 years ahead of the world. That is unique. Just to give you a clue now about the Virginia Assembly of 1619, just a digression down south to Virginia. The Mayflower Compact established the separation of church and state, as we have seen. The Virginia Assembly, created in 1619, established the concept of a representative government, democratically elected. Every male, all right, not every member of the community, but every male, 18 years old and older, voted for those representatives in that assembly or that Congress, if you will. Okay? That's what an assembly is. Everyone. And what did Morrison say? Not for 200 more years. Right. Would that happen outside of the English colonies? So there you go. Now, in the last several decades, last 40, 50 years, our time, some historians, hoping to radically change America and using history and race as a weapon, have argued that beginning in 1619, Virginia Assembly, when the first African immigrants came to Virginia, African immigrants arrived in 1619. The most important thing, according to these historians who want to radically change America, the most important thing was slavery and racism. Is that true? This is taught in many, perhaps most, of America's colleges and universities. Forget what I just told you. The most important thing was the establishment of slavery and racism in this colony. Therefore, these historians argue, either implicitly or explicitly, Americans should abandon their love of their country and radically change it to a socialist state in which there is no inequality. But this interpretation is simplistic and historically inaccurate. True history recovers and explains all significant factors of a past event, not just the chosen factor. The truth is that racism at that time in the Western world was absolutely endemic. The vast majority of white people everywhere saw themselves as superior to other peoples. It's true. So racism was, and still is, real. But it was not the only significant factor. The first Africans who came to Virginia in 1619 were not slaves. They were indentured servants. Oh, what's the difference? Is that just terminology? No. Because many of the white people who came to Virginia were also indentured servants. The first African Americans were not slaves. Indentured servants, just like many of the white people. No difference. They could earn their freedom after about 5 years in most cases. In fact, slavery, the word slavery, is not even mentioned in these statutes, that is the laws of Virginia, for another 50 years, till the late 17th century. So this whole interpretation that America was founded on racism, on slavery, was not the whole truth, and not even true. Now, slavery is going to grow. Slavery is going to become the dominant fact of American history in time, and we are going to fight a bloody war over it. But history changes over time, you see. What's true at one moment is not true in another. So what can we take out of this in terms of significant factors is not slavery at this time, but the fact that representative democracy was born at this time. Representative democracy was early Virginia's great gift to the future United States. As I said earlier, every male person 18 years or older could vote for that assembly. That was not the norm in the world at the time. That was radically new. The beginning of the New World. Even unified, the Pilgrims' chances were not good. The Mayflower dropped anchor in Plymouth Harbor in September 1620, the beginning of winter. The sojourners would have only the provisions they brought with them and what the forest and seas could provide. Why take such risks? Why do this? You're dropping anchor in December 1620 in New England. As anybody who's an NFL fan, you know that you don't want to take your NFL team to New England in December and January, do you? Tom Brady's tough enough. If he has the weather on his side, sayonara. Why did the Pilgrims do this? Why did they face the hazards of the Atlantic Ocean in a 17th century bucket? Why did they face the prospects of starvation and disease and attacks by Indians? Would you have risked your wife, your life, your daughter, your son in such an undertaking? Try to put yourself there. They did so because they believed God willed it. God called them. Many of you believe that you're here at George Fox because God called you. I believe I'm here at George Fox because God called me. One of them wrote, "We verily believe and trust the Lord is with us and that He will graciously prosper our endeavors according to the purity of our hearts." So if we are pure in heart, God will bless us, is what they believed. William Bradford, who later became their great leader, wrote, and I love this quote. I want you to write this quote down, and I want you to put it somewhere in your dorm or your apartment where you'll see it every once in a while. He said, "It is not with us as with other men. We are not like other men, whom small things can discourage, or small discontentments cause to wish themselves home again. But when Bradford wrote those words many years later, he had already lost his wife, Dorothy, in the first few days of the landing of the Mayflower at Plymouth. Look at those words. It is not with us as with other men, whom small things can discourage, or small discontentments cause us to wish ourselves home again. Even so, what happened over the next 6 months must have caused many of these pilgrims and strangers to wonder at God's purpose. Our next lecture is about the trials that they faced over the years. So, in summary, the pilgrims crossed the Atlantic in 1620 in order to establish their vision for a Christian community. In so doing, they put in place an idea of religious liberty that included the separation of church and state. Meanwhile, in 1619, their fellow Englishmen in Jamestown established a democratically elected assembly. This also created a precedent for the future United States. So, what are the important questions that a professor could ask that might be on the exam? I want you to tell me. If you're the professor, what are you going to ask? Somebody be bold.
What was the significance of the Mayflower Compact and the Virginia Assembly of 1619?
Bingo. That's the why. Okay, why do we care today? Why? 400 years later, are we still having lectures on this stuff? Okay, because it's the antecedents, the roots of where we come from. See? That's excellent. You learn to do that about all your reading and all your lectures, you're going to be light years ahead of other students. What else might I ask? So there's important ideas. What else is there?
Why the pilgrims were willing to take those risks.
Okay, why were the pilgrims, this is great. This is probably an equally important question. Why were the pilgrims willing to take those risks, do what they did? What's the answer to that? What? Because God willed it. Okay, in their minds, God willed it. Okay? What does the author of your text say about why the people of Jamestown went to Jamestown? It's different. They have a different motivation. What's that? Yeah, totally different motivation. But very much a part of American history. Look for that when you do the reading. Okay? Why did most of the people go to Jamestown? It's different from the pilgrims. Okay. Other questions you might ask? One more time. Yes?
What did the Virginia Assembly of 1619 establish?
Yes, thank you. What did the Virginia... That's kind of an offshoot of the previous question, but more specifically, what did the Virginia Assembly of 1619 establish in the colonies? Okay, great. All right, you're all tracking. Other important questions might be, well, who's significant amongst these pilgrims? William Bradford. It's in the note guide, right? Okay, you'll find that he's in the reading. Okay. Any other questions? God bless you. I'll see you then.